Hi. You know what time it is. Woo! Get into it! Get into it! Yes! Hi, y'all. It's Story Time with Chris. Also, if you didn't see the post I made, I got some new additions. So, to all my friends that are Welsh, I got a Welsh Christmas tale, A Child's Christmas in Wales. And it is written by Dylan Thomas, but the reason why I got it for two reasons. One, I'm a huge lover of, and I honestly can't really explain it to you, and if I try to explain it to you, I might think the reason is silly, but I have a huge love for Welsh literature, Welsh fairy tales and stuff like that. So I got this, and the second reason is because it is illustrated by Trina Shart Hyman, who is one of my favorite illustrators of all time. If you know that name, there are tons of books, tons of children's books, story books, novels I can pull up where her art is so distinctive. It's like she's about as famous as Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell has done a lot of really cool paintings of realism slash for all my art friends, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Norman Rockwell's type of art style is realism, but with a touch of like caricature to it. I don't know, like he brings life and persona to his art because it makes it seem like, yes, this is what actual people look like in real day-to-day life. I think it was the Saturday Evening Post or something like that his art would show up in. I'll have to double check on that. But for all of my 90s fans, we got Madeline's Christmas. Okay, first of all, most kids of today's age would not know what Madeline is. Madeline was a huge thing when I was a kid. The TV show, the books, it was about as popular as Clifford the Big Red Dog or Paddington, Little Bear, Frog and Toad, Amelia Bedelia. Madeline was great. This is a French story, like Babar the elephant. So the other equivalent, like Madeline's American equivalent would be like Annie, or like Little Orphan Annie, or Eloise. That's the closest I can really give to you to what Madeline is like for the American version, but we'll be reading that. And then if anybody, also in 90th Street, if anybody remembers the Little Critter series, Merry Christmas, Mom and Dad. I used to read these books a lot growing up to help me learn about reading. So that brings me to my next point, and I have to pause for a quick second to get this off my chest. So I was thinking about it before I started story time, and I had to think about, like, what is it that I'm grateful for? What is it that I, Christopher, am happy with and grateful for? One of the things that immediately came up was the fact that, like, I am grateful that I have a relationship with my parents, that I have a good and happy, healthy relationship with them. What I will say is this, is that parenting does not come with an instruction manual. You do the best of what you know how to do. And your children, from time to time, are going to throw you curveballs. And I definitely threw my parents a curveball, as I am their gay queer kid. So I know for a fact my parents had no context of how to deal with that. That's very different. You don't expect that, especially in the 90s. That was just like, especially a black kid coming from Cleveland, like, you just wouldn't expect that. So, like, my parents did the best of what they did with me, and though my coming out experience was good at some points and at other points it was not as great, I still love my parents, and I'm grateful to God. I'm trying not to get emotional. I'm grateful to God that I have such an amazing relationship with them both. I'm glad that I have their full support. I'm glad that they see me for who I am, and that they're not trying to censor me or to chide me away from how I present myself or how I, act, and they support my journey and let me live. So I'm trying not to cry because like it's really on my heart, y'all. Like I'm so grateful that despite some of the nasty, hateful comments that I would get from certain family members or family friends that I don't talk to for that reason. It's not that I hold a grudge to those people. It's just that once you've disrespected me or once you have crossed the line for me, I'm done with you. I wash my hands of you and I don't want nothing to do with you. And that's just how I felt. So I'm very blessed and very fortunate that God gave me the parents that I have. Even though they divorced when I was very young, I'm very grateful to them because they both taught me in their individual ways how to navigate life. I would not be Christopher Lamar Sains if I did not have my parents, Diva Davis, and my father, Peter Sains. I would not be who I am without them. My mother made a lot of sacrifices as a single parent in raising us and working 12-hour shifts, trying to, make ends meet, make sure we had everything. If we worked hard for our grades, we got rewarded. Little outings, going to see shows, going to concerts, going to sleepovers, working hard for, getting cool stuff. Like, I was poor, but I was never made to feel poor. Does that make sense? I was not my family was not one of wealth, but we were very blessed with what we had. And I never went without. I had what I needed. I had good books. I had my family. I had, people in my family that I'm close with. I have my church family that I love very dearly. I have my siblings. Sometimes they get on my nerves, but I love them immensely. So I'm grateful to my mom for the sacrifices that she made, for going out of her way to making sure I had what I had when I went to Pebblebrook High School. I was in a performing arts program there. I was a drama major, vocal performance minor, and my mom was very supportive. And even in the midst of my process of coming out, though it did bring a rift between us for a while, at the end of the day, she eventually came around, and through education and talking about what it means to be somebody like me and realizing I'm still the same goofy Christopher, I just happen to like guys. Like, that's just what it is, and everybody is born to be different. My mother always has said, Chris, you strive to be different, you strive to be different. And I always thought that was a negative thing. But in hindsight, looking back, and later I did realize this when I was in my late teens, like coming out of high school, like going to college, my mother basically would say, like, please go and be as creative and as fanciful as you are, because I would rather you be yourself than to be a statistic or be a stereotype. My dad, though he is not perfect, he's an amazing dad in his own way. I didn't need my parents to have a whole lot of money in the bank to show me that they loved me. I'm very grateful that they taught me how to be humble, to be street smart, to be vigilant of those who don't have my best interests at heart. They taught me how to sniff out mess. And my dad helped me love sports and love what it means to show true sportsmanship and to be courteous and to be respectful, to humble yourself even when you know that you're winning or know that you're doing great. Always be humble, stay modest, stay humble, and do the best of what you know how to do. And don't let anybody, try to pull one over on you. And my dad was always very talkative about what that meant and how to appreciate what being a quote-unquote man is in my own way. That took a while for us to get there, but I'm very grateful for the patience that my dad has had, for the unconditional love that he and my mom have shown me over the years. And that's all I wanted to talk about before we start story time. I'm just grateful to have such amazing parents. Ma, Dad, if y'all are watching this video, I love y'all very much. I'm trying not to cry. It's been a really good day, and I'm just so grateful to have such an amazing childhood growing up. It wasn't always easy, but I'm so grateful to have them in my life. And it just got to me today. Like, I got to see so many families come into the restaurant, and people catching up, and I was just like, wow. Like, I am grateful to have that opportunity, even though my mom lives down south and my dad lives in Cleveland, and I don't get to see them often. When we do talk, it's always a great time. So, my dad, love y'all. You gotta be grateful, y'all. You gotta show people that, like, you love them all year round, not just some of the time. You know what I mean? Like, gosh, I was trying not to cry because this was really on my spirit. This was as deep as that post about Pocahontas I posted on Instagram about Coco versus John Smith. I was like, Disney really had us thinking that John Smith was in when Pocahontas had a betrothed who actually could fit the bill. So, you know, shout out to my parents, and shout out to all of those parents who have LGBT children and Black LGBT children. You know, we love you. We appreciate your support, and we wouldn't be here without that support. So I understand there are people who don't have that, but the beauty of family is it's not whose blood you have, it's the people who truly show you unconditional love. So whether it's a friend, a work friend, a church mom, or church dad, or work mom, work dad, whoever you have, that is your people who show you love. That is your family. Your family is who you make it to be. And it's not always about whose blood you have, because sometimes family will treat you worse than a stranger on the street. But I'm glad I do have the family that I have, and the people in my family who support me 100%. So thank you for allowing me to do that. Whew, okay. I'm glad I got that off my chest, because today was a really good day. I've just been very emotional because I've been thinking about all the things I'm grateful for, and that I'm still here on this earth with you all. All right. So more than likely so tomorrow night we'll be on Instagram for the Neverending Story, but on Facebook we'll be reading, we'll go ahead tomorrow. We'll probably read Madeline for tomorrow night's reading. It won't be Peter Pan for Facebook. It'll be Madeline. This is a short little holiday excerpt. I really tried to find No More Tamales, and I couldn't find it I've looked at 3 different bookstores, couldn't find it. And the one bookstore that I did look up over at the Green, for those who live here in Dayton, there's a Books A Million that's over there, and they didn't have it. And I was really bummed out about it. So I'm going to have to order it online, and unfortunately, by the time it gets here, Christmas will have then passed. But I think I more than likely will read it for Three Kings Day, and go from there. So Chapter 8. The Mermaid's Lagoon. If you shut your eyes and are a lucky one, you may see at times a shapeless pool of lovely pale colors suspended in the darkness. Then if you squeeze your eyes tighter, the pool begins to take shape, and the colors become so vivid that with another squeeze they might go on fire. But just before they go on fire, you see the lagoon. This is the nearest you ever get to it on the mainland, just one heavenly moment. If there could be 2 moments, you might see the surf and hear the mermaids singing. The children often spent long summer days on this lagoon, swimming or floating most of the time, playing the mermaid games in the water and so forth. You must not think from this that the mermaids were on friendly terms with them. On the contrary, it was among Wendy's lasting regrets that all the time she was on the island, she never had a civil word from one of them. Which seems to be a running trend for Wendy. All the girls don't like her. Jealousy. When she stole softly to the edge of the lagoon, she might see them by the score, especially on Marooner's Rock, where they loved to bask, combing out their hair in a lazy way that quite irritated her. Or she might even swim on tiptoe, as it were, to within a yard of them, but then they saw her and dived, probably splashing her with their tails, not by accident, but intentionally. Mean Girls, mermaid style. or Mermaid Edition. They treated all the boys in the same way, except of course Peter, who chatted with them on Marooner's Rock by the hour, and sat on their tails when they got cheeky. He gave Wendy one of their combs. The most haunting time at which to see them is at the turn of the moon, when they uttered a strange wailing cries, but the lagoon is dangerous for mortals then. Until the evening, of which we have none to tell, Wendy had never seen the lagoon by moonlight, less from fear, but of course Peter would have accompanied her, then because she had strict rules about everyone being in bed by 7. She was often at the lagoon, however, on sunny days after rain, when the mermaids come up in extraordinary numbers to play with their bubbles, the bubbles of many colors made in rainbow water that they treat as balls, hitting them gaily from one another with their tails, and tried to keep them in the rainbow till they burst. The goals are at each end of the rainbow, and the keepers only are allowed to use their hands. Sometimes a dozen of these games will be going on in the lagoon at a time, and it's quite a pretty sight. But at the moment the children tried to join in, they had to play by themselves, for the mermaids immediately disappeared. And nevertheless, we have proof that they secretly watched the interlopers and were not above taking an idea from them. For John introduced a new way of hitting the bubble with the head instead of the hand, and the mermaids adopted it. This is the one mark that John has left on the Neverland, considering he's the middle child. Shout out to middle kids. We are awesome. It must also have been rather pretty to see the children resting on a rock for half an hour after their midday meal. Wendy insisted on their doing this, and it had to be a real rest, even though the meal was make-believe. So they lay there in the sun, and their bodies glistened in it while she sat beside them and looked important. So hopefully you can see this. Oh, sorry about the bookmark. There we go. There they are, playing in the rainbow. In the water. There's Peter flying above them. Everybody's just having a great time. It was one such day that they were all on Marooner's Rock. The rock was not much larger than their great bed, but of course they all knew how to not take up much room, and they were dozing or at least lying with their eyes shut and pitching occasionally when they thought Wendy was not looking. She was very busy stitching. While she stitched, a change came to the lagoon. Little shivers ran over it, and the sun went away and shadows stole across the water, turning it cold. Wendy could no longer see to thread her needle, and when she looked up, the lagoon that had always hitherto been such a laughing place seemed formidable and unfriendly. It was not, she knew, that night had come, but something as dark as night had come. No, worse than that. It had not come. But it had sent that shiver through the sea to say that it was coming. What was it? There, crowded upon all the stories she had been told of Marooner's Rock, so-called because evil captains put sailors on it and leave them there to drown. They drown when the tide rises, for then it is submerged. Of course, she should have roused the children at once, but merely because of the unknown that was stalking toward them, but because it was no longer good for them to sleep on a rock grown chilly. But she was a young mother, and she did not know this, and she thought you simply must stick to your rule about half an hour after the midday meal. So though fear was upon her, she longed to hear male voices. She would not awaken them. Even when she heard the sound of muffled oars, though her heart was in her mouth, she did not awaken them. She stood over them to let them have their sleep out. Was it not brave of Wendy? It was well for those boys that there was one among them who could sniff danger even in his sleep. Peter sprang erect, as wide awake as once as a dog, and with one warning cry he roused the others. He stood motionless, one hand to his ear. "Pirates!" he cried. The others came closer to him. A strange smile was playing about his face, and Wendy saw it and shuddered. While that smile was on his face, no one dared address him. All they could do was to stand ready to obey. The order came sharp and decisive. "Dive!" There was a gleam of legs, and instantly the lagoon seemed deserted. Marooner's Rock stood alone in the forbidding waters, as if it were itself marooned. There was a gleam of... The boat drew near. It was the pirate dinghy with 3 figures in here, Smee and Starkey, and the third a captive, no other than Tiger Lily. Her hands and ankles were tied, and she knew what was to be her fate. She was to be left on the rock to perish, and into one of her race more terrible than death by fire or torture. For it is not written in the book of the tribe that there is no path through water to the happy hunting ground. Yet her face was impassive. She was the daughter of a chief. She must die as a chief's daughter. It is enough. They had caught her boarding the pirate ship with the knife in her mouth. No watch was kept on the ship, it being Hook's boast that the wind of his name guarded the ship for a mile around. Now her fate would help her to guard it also. Excuse me. One more whale would go the round in that night by night. In the gloom that they brought with them, the 2 pirates did not see the rock till they crashed into it. "Luff you, lubber!" cried an Irish voice that was Smee's. "Here's the rock. Now then, what we have to do is to hoist the native onto it and leave her there to drown." It was the work of one brutal moment to land the beautiful girl on the rock. She was too proud to offer a vain resistance. Quite near the rock, but out of sight, 2 heads were bobbing up and down, Peter and Wendy's. Wendy was crying, for it was the first tragedy she had seen. Peter had seen many tragedies, but he had forgotten them all. He was less sorry than Wendy for Tiger Lily. It was 2 against 1 that angered him, and he meant to save her. An easy way would have been to wait until the pirates had gone, but he was never one to choose the easy way. There was almost nothing he could not do, and he now imitated the voice of Hook. "Ahoy there, you lubbers!" he called. It was a marvelous imitation. "The captain," said the pirates, staring at each other in surprise. "He must be swimming out to us," Starkey said when they had looked for him in vain. "We're putting the native on the rock," Smee called out. "Set her free!" came the astonishing answer. "Free?" "Yes, cut her bonds and let her go." "But, Captain—" "At once, do you hear me?" cried Peter, "or I'll plunge my hook into you." "This is queer," Smee gasped. "Better do what the captain orders," said Starkey nervously. "Aye, aye," Smee said, and he cut Tiger Lily's cords. At once, like an eel, she slid between Starkey's legs and into the water. Of course, Wendy was very elated over Peter's cleverness, but she knew that he would be elated also and very likely crow and thus betray himself. So at once her hand went out to cover his mouth, but it was stayed even in the act, for "Boat ahoy!" rang over the lagoon in Hook's voice, and this time it was not Peter who had spoken. Peter may have been about to crow, but his face puckered in a whistle of surprise instead. "Boat ahoy!" again came the cry. Now Wendy understood. The real Hook was also in the water. He was swimming to the boat, and as his men showed a light to guide him, he had soon reached them. In the light of the lantern, Wendy saw his hook grip the boat's side. She saw his evil, swarthy face as he rose, dripping from the water and quaking. She would have liked to swim away, but Peter would not budge. He was tingling with life and also top-heavy with conceit. "Am I not a wonder? Oh, am I not a wonder?" he whispered to her, and though she thought so also, she was really glad, for the sake of his reputation, that no one heard him except herself. He sighed to her to listen. The 2 pirates were very curious to know what had brought their captain to them, but he sat with his head on his hook in a position of profound melancholy. "Captain, is all well?" they asked timidly, but he answered with a hollow moan. "He sighs," said Smee. "He sighs again," said Starkey. "But yet another 3rd time he sighs," said Smee. "What's up, Captain?" Then at last he spoke passionately. "The game's up!" he cried. "Those boys have found a mother." Affrighted though she was, Wendy swelled with pride. "Oh, evil day!" cried Starkey. "What's a mother?" asked the ignorant Smee. Wendy was so shocked that she exclaimed, "He doesn't know?" And always after this she felt that if you could have a pet pirate, Smee would be her one. Peter pulled her beneath the water, for Hook had started up, crying, "What was that?" "I heard nothing," said Starkey, raising the lantern over the waters, and as the pirates looked, they saw a strange sight. It was the nest I've told you of, floating on the lagoon, and the Never Bird was sitting on it. See, said Hook in an answer to Smee's question. That is a mother. What a lesson. The nest must have fallen into the water. But would the mother desert her eggs? No. There was a break in his voice as if for a moment he recalled innocent days but he burst away this weakness with his hook. Smee, much impressed, gazed at the bird as the nest was borne past. Excuse me. But the more suspicious Starkey said, if she is mother, perhaps she is hanging about here to help Peter. Hook winced. Aye, he said, that is the fear that haunts me. He was roused from his dejection by Smee's eager voice. Captain, said Smee, could we not kidnap the boy's mother and make her our mother? It is a princely scheme, cried Hook, and at once it took practical shape in his great brain. We will seize the children and carry them to the boat. The boys will make walk the plank, and Wendy shall be our mother. Again, Wendy forgot herself. Never, she cried and bobbed. What was that? But they could see nothing. They thought it must have been but a leaf in the wind. Do you agree, my billies? Asked Hook. There is my hand on it, they both said. And there is my hook. Swear. They all swore. By this time they were on the rock, and suddenly Hook remembered Tiger Lily. Where is the princess? He demanded abruptly. He had a playful humor in moments, and they thought this was one of the moments. That's all right, Captain, Smee answered complacently. We let her go. Let her go? Cried Hook. 'Twas your own orders, the boatswain faltered. You called over the water to tell her to let her go, said Starkey. Brimstone and gall, thundered Hook. What cozening is here? His face had gone black with rage, but he saw that they believed their words, and he was startled. Lads, he said, shaking a little, I gave no such order. It is passing queer, Smee said, and they all fidgeted uncomfortably. Hook raised his voice, but there was a quiver in it. Spirit that haunts this dark lagoon tonight, he cried. Dost thou hear me? Of course Peter should have kept quiet, but of course he didn't. He immediately answered in Hook's voice. Odds, bombs, hammer and tongs, I hear you. In the supreme moment, Hook did not blanch, even at the gills, but Smee and Starkey clung to each other in terror. Who are you, stranger? Speak, Hook demanded. I am James Hook, replied the voice, captain of the Jolly Roger. You are not, Hook cried hoarsely. Brimstone and gall, the voice retorted. Say that again and I'll cast you ashore, an anchor in you. Hook cried a more ingratiating manner. If you are Hook, he said humbly, come tell me who I am. A codfish, replied the voice. Only a codfish. A codfish, Hook echoed blanketly. Ooh, I gotta watch, because I've been pausing for a second, y'all. I've been losing my voice, so I'm trying not to overreach, so I apologize. And as it was then, but not until then, that his proud spirit broke, he saw his men draw back from him. Have we been captained all this time by a codfish, they muttered. It is lowering to our pride. They were his dogs, snapping at him, but tragic figure though he had become, he scarcely heeded them. Against such fearful evidence, it was not their belief in him that he needed. Oh, excuse me. It was his own. I apologize, y'all. He felt his ego slipping from him. Don't desert me, bully, he whispered hoarsely to it. Don't desert me. In his dark nature there was a touch of the feminine, and in all the great pirates it sometimes gave him intuitions. Suddenly he tried the guessing game. Hook, he called, have you another voice? Now Peter could never resist a game. He answered blithely in his own voice, I have. And another name? Aye, aye. Vegetable? Asked Hook. No. Mineral? No. Animal? Yes. Man? No. The answer rang out scornfully. Boy? Yes. Ordinary boy? No. Wonderful boy? To Wendy's pain, the answer that rang out this time was Yes. Are you in England? No. Are you here? Yes. Hook was completely puzzled. You ask him some questions. You ask him some questions, he said to the others, wiping his damp brow. Smee reflected. But I can't think of anything, he said regretfully. Can't guess, crowed Peter. Do you give it up? Of course, in his pride, he was carrying the game too far, and the miscreants saw their chance. Yes, yes, they answered eagerly. Well then, he cried, I am Peter Pan! Pan! In a moment, Hook was himself again, and Smee and Starkey were his faithful henchmen. Now we have him, Hook shouted. Into the water, Smee, Stark! Mind the boat! Take him dead or alive! He leaped as he spoke, and simultaneously came the gay voice of Peter. Are you ready, boys? Aye, aye, from various parts of the lagoon. Then lam into the pirates! The fight was short and sharp. First to draw blood was John, who gallantly climbed into the boat and held Starkey. There was a fierce struggle in which the cutlass was torn from the pirate's grasp. He wriggled it overboard, and John leapt after him. The dinghy drifted away. Here and there a head bobbed up in the water, and there was a flash of steel, followed by a cry or a whoop. In the confusion, some struck as their own side. The corkscrew of Smee got Toodles in the fourth rib, but he was himself pinked in turn by Curly. Farther from the rock, Starkey was pressing slightly, and the twins hard. Where all this time was Peter? He was seeking bigger game. The others were all brave boys, but they must not be blamed for backing from the pirate captain. His iron claw made a circle of dead water round him, from which they fled like affrighted fishes. But there was one who did not fear him. There was one prepared to enter that circle. Strangely, it was not in the water that they had met. Hook rose to the rock to breathe, and at the same moment Peter scaled it on the opposite side. The rock was slippery as a ball, and they had to crawl rather than climb. Neither knew that the other was coming. Each feeling for a grip met the other's arm. In surprise, they raised their heads. Their faces were almost touching. So they met. Some of the greatest heroes have confessed that just because they fell to, they had a sinking. Had it been so with Peter at the moment, I would admit. After all, this was the only man that the sea cook had feared. But Peter had no sinking. He had once feeling only gladness, and he gnashed his pretty teeth with joy. Quick as thought, he snatched a knife from Hook's belt and was about to drive it home, when he saw that he was higher up the rock than his foe. It would not have been fighting fair. He gave the pirate a hand to help him up. It was then that Hook bit him. Not the pain of this, but its unfairness was what dazed Peter. It made him quite helpless. He could only stare, horrified. Every child is affected thus the first time he is treated unfairly. All he thinks he has a right to when he comes to you to be yours is fair. After you have been unfair to him, he will love you again, but he will never afterwards be quite the same boy. No one ever gets over the first unfairness, and no one except Peter. He often met it, but he always forgot it. I suppose that was the real difference between him and all the rest. So when he met it now, it was the first time, and he could just stare helpless. Twice the iron hand clawed him. A few minutes afterwards, the other boys saw Hook in the water striking wildly for the ship. No elation in his pestilence face now, only white fear, for the crocodile was in dogged pursuit of him. On ordinary occasions the boys would have swum alongside cheering, but now they were uneasy, for they had lost both Peter and Wendy, and were scouring the lagoon for them, calling them by name. They found the dinghy and went home in it, shouting, "Peter! Wendy!" as they went, but no answer came, save mocking laughter from the mermaids. And they must be swimming back or flying, the boys concluded. They were not very anxious. They had such faith in Peter. They chuckled boylike because they would be late for bed, as it was all Mother Wendy's fault. When their voices died away, there came cold silence over the lagoon, and then a feeble cry, "Help! Help!" Two small figures were beating against the rock. The girl had fainted and lay on the boy's arm. With a last effort, Peter pulled her up the rock and then laid down beside her. Even as he also fainted, he saw that the water was rising. He knew that they would soon be drowned, but he could do no more. As they lay side by side, a mermaid caught Wendy by the feet and began pulling her softly into the water. Peter, feeling her slip from him, woke with a start and was just in time to draw her back, but he had to tell her the truth. "We are on the rock, Wendy," he said, "but it's growing smaller. Soon the water will be over it." She did not understand even now. "We must go," she said almost brightly. "Yes," he answered faintly. "Shall we swim or fly, Peter?" He had to tell her. "Do you think you could swim or fly as far as the island, Wendy, without any help?" She had to admit that she was too tired. He moaned. "Ugh. What is it?" she asked, anxious for him at once. "I can't help you, Wendy. Hook wounded me. I can neither fly nor swim." "Do you mean we shall both be drowned?" "Look how the water is rising." They put their hands over their eyes to shut out the sight. They thought they would soon be no more. As they sat thus, something brushed against Peter as light as a kiss, and stayed there as if saying timidly, "Can I be of some use?" It was the tail of a kite, which Michael had made some days before. It had torn itself out of his hand and floated away. "Michael's kite!" Peter said without interest, but next moment he had seized the tail and was pulling the kite toward him. "It lifted Michael off the ground," he cried. "Why should it not carry you?" "Both of us!" "It can't lift two." Michael and Curly tried. "Let us draw lots," Woody said bravely. "And you a lady? Never!" Already he had tied the tail round her. She clung to him. She refused to go without him. But with a goodbye, Wendy, he pushed her from the rock, and in a few moments she was borne out of sight. Peter was alone on the lagoon. The rock was very small now. Soon it would be submerged. Pale rays of light tiptoed across the waters, and by there was to be heard a sound at once the most musical and the most melancholy in the world, the mermaids calling to the moon. Peter was not quite like other boys, but he was afraid at last. A tremor ran through him, like a shudder passing over the sea, but on the sea one shudder follows another till there were hundreds of them, and Peter felt just the one. Next moment he was standing erect on the rock again, with that smile on his face and a drum beating within him. It was saying, to die would be an awfully big adventure. So there's Peter on Marooner's Rock as the tide is coming in. And the moon shining, which is kind of ironic because the moon is gaining fullness even as we speak outside. But let me use the restroom really fast and I'll be right back for the next chapter. I'll be right back. Alright, here I come, y'all. Oh, I knew I had that in there. All right. Chapter 9. Wow, I lost my train of thought that fast. I'm so sorry. The Never Bird. The last sounds Peter heard before he was quite alone were the mermaids retiring one by one to their bedchambers under the sea. He was too far away to hear the doors shut, but every door in the coral caves where they live rings a tiny bell when it opens or closes, as in all the nicest houses on the mainland, and he heard the bells. Steadily the waters rose till they were nibbling at his feet, and to pass the time until they made their final gulp, he watched the only thing moving on the lagoon. He thought it was a piece of floating paper, perhaps part of the kite, and wondered idly how long it would take to drift to ashore. Presently he noticed as an odd thing that was undoubtedly out upon the lagoon with some definite purpose, for it was fighting the tide and sometimes winning. And when it won, Peter, always sympathetic to the weaker side, could not help clapping. It was such a gallant piece of paper. It was not really a piece of paper, it was the Never Bird, making desperate efforts to reach Peter on her nest. By working her wings in a way she had learned since the nest fell into the water, she was able to do some extent to guide her strange craft. She had come to save him, to give him her nest, though there were eggs in it. I rather wonder at the bird nest, for though he had been nice to her, he had also sometimes tormented her. I can suppose only that, like Mrs. Darling and the rest of them, she was melted because he had all his first teeth. She called out to him what she had come for, and he called out to her what she was doing, and of course neither of them understood the other's language. In fanciful stories, people could talk to the birds freely. And I wish for the moment I could pretend that this was such a story and say that Peter replied intelligently to the Never Bird, but truth is best, and I want to tell only what really happened. Well, not only could they not understand each other, but they forgot their own manners.
I want you to get into the nest,
the bird called, speaking as slowly and distinctly as possible.
And then you can drift ashore, but I am too tired to bring it any nearer, so you must try to swim to it.
What are you quacking about? Peter answered. Why don't you let the nest drift as usual?
I want you,
the bird said, and repeated it all over. Then Peter tried slow and distinct. What are you quacking about? And so on. The Never Bird became irritated, and they have very short tempers.
You dunderheaded little jay, she screamed. Why don't you do as I tell you?
Peter felt that she was calling him names, and at a venture he retorted hotly, So are you! And rather curiously, they both snapped out the same remark, Shut up! Which, by the way, y'all, kids watching, shut up is not a nice word to use when you're young. Don't use it. I was taught that, so I'm just going to pass on that knowledge. Shut up is not a nice word to say. Just say, be quiet. I mean, you say crazy things when you're mad, but just, kids, don't tell nobody to shut up. That's rude. Nevertheless, the bird was determined to save him if she could, and by one last mighty effort she propelled the nest against the rock. Then up she flew, deserting her egg so as to make her meaning clear. Then at last he understood and clutched the nest and waved her thanks to the bird as she fluttered overhead, and it was not to receive his thanks, however, that she hung there in the sky. It was not even to watch him get into the nest, it was to see what he did with her eggs. There were 2 large white eggs, and Peter lifted them up and reflected. Bird covered her face with her wings so as to not to see the last of her eggs, but she could not help peeping between the feathers. I forget whether I have told you that there was a stave on the rock driven into it by some buccaneers of long ago to mark the site of buried treasure. The children had discovered the glittering hoard, and when in mischievous mood used to fling showers of moidores, diamonds, pearls, and pieces of 8 to the gulls, which pounced upon them for food, and then flew away raging at the scurvy trick that had been played upon them. The stave was still there, and on it Starkey had hung his hat, a deep tarpaulin, watertight, and with a broad brim. Peter put the eggs into this hat and set it on the lagoon. It floated beautifully. The Never Bird saw at once what he was up to and screamed in admiration of him, and at last Peter crowed his agreement with her, but he got into the nest, reared the stave in it as a mast, and hung up his shirt for a sail, which Peter is very smart for doing this. At the same moment, the bird fluttered down upon the hat and once more sat snugly on her eggs. She drifted in one direction, and he was borne off into another, both cheering. Of course, when Peter landed, he beached his bouquet in a place where the bird would easily find it, but the hat was such a great success that she abandoned the nest. It drifted about till it went to pieces, and often Starkey came to the shore of the lagoon, and with many bitter feelings watched the bird sitting on his hat. As we shall not see her again, and it may be worth mentioning here that all never birds now build in the shape of nest with a broad brim on which the youngsters take an airing. Great were the rejoicings when Peter reached the home under the ground almost as soon as Wendy, who had been carrying hither and thither by the kite, which, children, hither is here, thither is there. It's an old world term. Every boy had adventures to tell, but perhaps the biggest adventure of all was that they were several hours late for bed. This so inflated them that they did various dodgy things to keep staying up still longer, and such as demanding bandages. But Wendy, though glorying in having them all home again safe and sound, was scandalized by the lateness of the hour and cried, "To bed, to bed!" in a voice that they had to obey. Next day, however, she was awfully tender and gave out bandages to every one, and they played till bedtime at limping about and carrying their arms in slings. And that is where we'll end for tonight. Now we are about to enter chapter 10 for tomorrow, and we only have 7 chapters left after that, so we are breezing through this. Thank you so much for joining me. I love you all so much. Thank you for letting me be myself and showing you the magic of literature, because reading is not just fundamental, it is essential. It is important and integral to our daily life experience to learn about different perspectives, different cultures, different languages, different walks of life. It doesn't matter if you're reading a book, a novella, a comic, a manga, a magazine, a newspaper clipping. You should always be reading. That's all I have for you. Bye, y'all. See you next time.